Okay, we're continuing with quotes. We're going in alphabetical order. We're on the letter L. We just did C.S. Lewis yesterday. Today we're going to do some additional people with the last name of Lewis. First of all, Michael Lewis. He's a writer about economics. And his best line, I read this book by him called Liar's Poker. This is one of the greatest economics lines of all time. He says, in every business deal, there's always two partners and a chump. And if you don't know who the chump is, then the chump is you. So unfortunately, I have often found myself to be the person who doesn't know who the chump is, meaning that I'm the chump. So learn that while you're young, and you'll be less likely to get chumped. Okay, then here's another one. Those who know don't tell, and those who tell don't know. Yeah, be careful who you take economic money advice from, because a lot of people giving it don't know what they're talking about. All right, next we're going to do Sinclair Lewis, American writer. He lived from 1885 to 1951. And he said, the nation is proudest and noblest and most exalted, which has the greatest number of really great men. So you hear that type of talk from academics, because academics think academics are the greatest, okay? And you'll hear similar things, from, Samuel Johnson. He said, writers are our nation's glory, Percy Bysshe Shelley thought that poets should rule the world. Aristotle thought philosophers were the greatest men. So, and Schopenhauer said the great men of academic achievement were the highest level of aristocracy, more so than the money aristocracy, okay, or the royalty aristocracy. But anyways, everybody always thinks their own thing is the best. But at the same time, I like a country that will value its intellectuals to be, know something useful and to tell the truth. That'll be a better country. Anyways, next by Sinclair Lewis. He says, I am convinced that everything that is worthwhile in the world has been accomplished by the free, inquiring, and critical spirit, and that preservation of this spirit is more important than any social system whatsoever. Yeah, I would agree with that. Whenever you hear about some genius achievement, it usually comes from some guy who wanted to understand something, and he just spent a lot of time on his own trying to figure out. It doesn't almost ever come from funding by a big corporation. Look at these big corporations. They put over, $500 billion in researching cancer since 1970. What have they discovered? Nothing. Essentially nothing. Okay? $500 billion. You're taking that money and throwing it in the garbage can because they're just trying to win the lottery to make a new drug for money. They're not trying to understand cancer. They're not trying to help the patient. Don't ever mistake drug research for trying to help a patient. They're two totally different things. Okay. Yeah, and you should support those individual guys doing stuff. Like Steve Wozniak figured out how to make a computer. Okay. Hal Huggins figured out electrical currents between metals in the mouth with dental stuff. Okay, that's where achievements come from. Some guy just tinkers around, and then figures it out. And it usually is a guy, because the guy's got nothing else to do. All through history up until, the 1960s, women are having 10 children. They're pretty darn busy. They can't just sit by themselves all day in a room tinkering with something to figure it out. It's just not reality, okay? And then nowadays, when they're having these careers and they're not having babies, they're having fun till they're about 30 with all their friends and getting their little prestige. And then they get a little older and like, oh my God, I forgot to have a baby. I forgot to get married. And then they're not happy. Because I know a lot of doctors like that. Okay, let's continue with Sinclair Lewis. He says, but the men of ritual and the men of barbarism are capable of shutting up the men of science and silencing them forever. Yeah, you go to communist country, Russia, nothing comes out of there. Nothing. Zero. Nada. And you look at these other commie countries, what do? They just copy the, a free country, USA, at least when it used to be free. All right, now he's got another line, Sinclair Lewis. He says, when fascism comes to America, it will come to America wrapped in a flag, and it will call itself 100 Americanism. Yep, it'll just kind of do like what Octavian Caesar Augustus did in Rome. He would take institutions and keep the same old name, but replace what they actually do. Okay, Sinclair Lewis, people read fiction for emotion, not for information. How about for both, buddy? Okay, next, George Lichtenberg, 1742 to 1799. His first quote, is it strange that only extraordinary men make the discoveries which later appear so easy and simple? The reason is because you have to get past a lot of blockage if you're trying to figure something out look what happens to you. Like, look, I'm the guy who figured out the best explanation for cognitive decline, dementia, brain degeneration, neurodegeneration of the brain. I'm the best person who figured out spinal degeneration. What ends up happening to me? The research journals refuse to publish my papers. I go for funding. The funding organizations refuse to fund my stuff. I'm shadow banned all over the internet. I'm shadow banned for everything I do. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. That's why almost nobody wants to make a real discovery rather than, bullshit discoveries like come up with a drug, has a fake research, 1% improvement, and then the drug company hypes it. Okay, that's fake research. Real research is something where you change the paradigm, because that always pisses off the people who run the show, because they're making money off keeping the paradigm exactly the way it is. So they don't like innovators. They don't like geniuses. They don't like it when a great discovery is made. So it basically takes somebody with a lot of guts saying, hey, fuck you, here's the truth, take it or leave it, shove it up your ass, okay? And if you don't have that type of personality, not many people do, because there's serious consequences for that. If you're a young guy and you tell the establishment, fuck off, I've got the truth, they might go, well, fuck you, pal, we're not going to give you your PhD, you're not going to get tenure, we're going to deny all your funding, we're going to discredit you. So there's actually very strong pressure in medicine and biology and these types of fields to not allow a discovery to be made. A perfect example is, I remember back in the 1990s, I have a friend who's a PhD molecular biologist, and one of his friends figured out that high fructose corn syrup was routinely contaminated with mercury as they pushed it through a chloralkali vat, and that mercury was getting into the food, and that's why high fructose corn syrup was described as a preservative. So do you think they shook this guy's hand and gave him an award? No, they said, screw you, asshole. You made our company look bad, and they fired him and discredited him, okay? So that's what happens, okay? That's what happens routinely. That's what usually happens. And that's why I always laugh when people say, oh, the Catholic Church didn't support science because, they put Galileo on house arrest. The reason they put Galileo on house arrest is because he was making fun of the Pope, calling him Simplicio, stupid dunce, okay? So Galileo should not have done that, but the Pope also overreacted, and that led to a great embarrassment for the church. But guess what? That's the only time I ever heard of the church doing anything against science. Whereas modern establishment, all day long, every day, blocks science, blocks it like crazy. Why is it? It's obvious that I'm brilliant. You can see me on the show. Why is it that no research company wants to talk to me? No medical school wants to interview me. No doctor is calling me saying, why don't you come speak? What you're saying is so obviously wonderful to help our patients, okay? The doctors come up to me personally, tell me my health videos are the best ones on the whole internet, that the health information from my videos and from Dr. McDougall is the best on the whole internet. But they also then tell me afterwards, we could never ever allow you to speak at our medical center because you basically make a joke, a mockery out of the standard textbooks, and we couldn't allow that. That would be harmful to our prestige, harmful to our financial business. But the same doctors, they come to me personally to help them with their personal medical problems, to help them with their patient problems who they care about as friends, with their family members. They want my advice because they know I'm right. They did the same thing with McDougall. They did the same thing with Caldwell-Esselstyn. That's just how it is. Okay. Like Thomas Shaw said, good thinking a lot of times is more a matter of courage than intelligence. Okay, George Lichtenberg continues, erudition can produce foliage without producing fruit. Yeah, a lot of these college professors are just bullshitters. They don't really know anything. George Lichtenberg, a donkey appears to me like a horse translated into Dutch. Soothsayers make a better living in the world than truthsayers. Yeah, if you tell people what they want to hear, a soothsayer, they'll give you money. If you tell them the truth, they get pissed off at you. George Lichtenberg, perhaps in time the so-called Dark Ages will be thought of as including our own. Yeah, this is going to be looked on our current age as a time of the Dark Ages, okay? There's been progress in tech, which is used to, enslave us, but there hasn't been that much progress in medical science. Look at it. The so-called, war on cancer has been a big joke. They made essentially no progress. More patients are dying from cancer than ever before. You call that progress? So we've gone backwards since the 1970s. Okay, how about coronary artery disease? Cure rate, 0 with conventional medicine. How about diabetes? Cure rate, 0 with conventional medicine. How about coronary artery disease? Cure rate, 0% with conventional medicine. Walter Kempner, Nathan Pritikin, they were curing this stuff back in the 1950s, 1960s. But we can't cure it now because you can't cure it with a drug. It's not a drug deficiency disease. It's a diet disease or a toxicology disease, some of these things. Okay, George Lichtenberg, man is a cause-seeking creature. All right, next a quote from Eric Liddell. He's a guy who was featured in that movie Chariots of Fire, which is a really good movie. His nickname was the Flying Scotsman. And he refused to run in the Olympics because they had the race on Sunday. Okay, there's a pretty pious guy. Okay, I'm more of a believer, how you treat people is how you show your piety, more so than following some dogma rule. Okay, Gordon Liddy, he's a famous American politician. Later on had a radio show. He was working for Nixon, and this is what historian Paul Johnson wrote about him. For a first offense, taking part in a burglary in which nothing was stolen, no one was hurt, and no resistance offered, Gordon Liddy was sentenced to 20 years in jail, of which he served 5 before President Carter took pity on him. His real crime was not burglary at all, but his refusal to participate in the campaign of cruelty waged by the judge. Okay, Gordon Liddy, yeah, he didn't want to rat out his fellow worker buddies, and he wrote a really good book. The name of his book was like, When I Was Young, This Used to Be a Free Country. If you want to know what America was like back in the 1950s, read that book, and you'll be amazed. It was actually a very good book. Okay, here's another Gordon Liddy line. On whom does the cheetah prey? The old, the sick, the wounded, the weak, the very young, but never the strong. The lesson is, if you would not be prey, then you'd better be strong. Okay, our next person here is Justus von Liebig. So Liebig is kind of a funny name, because if you Englishify that, anglicize that, it's lie big, the big liar. Okay, but anyways, and I've also heard it joked, somebody said there's a lot of liability for that. Liability, that establishment has a lot of ability to lie. Okay, Justus Liebig. The secret of all those who make discoveries is that they regard nothing as impossible. Okay, well, they're just able to see beyond conventional ways. Here's a good one. The acquisition of a new truth is like adding a new sense. It renders a man capable of perceiving and recognizing a large number of things that are invisible and hidden from others as they were from him originally. Yeah, once you understand that atherosclerosis is a blood clot, it's pretty obvious. Anything that makes the blood clot is a risk factor for atherosclerosis. Okay, so getting that concept, that's an academic orgasm when it opens up a whole new way of seeing a situation. Once you understand that dietary fat causes insulin resistance, high-fat foods increase insulin risk. Okay, and they increase hypertension risk. Once you understand membrane ion pumps, you understand that to eat a diet other than a primarily plant-based diet, if not entirely plant-based diet, you're screwing up your electrolytes, so you're going to be screwed. There's no way around it. Okay. Justus Liebig. From one sublime genius, Newton, more light has emanated than the labor of 1,000 years preceding had been able to produce, and let's say in mathematics and in physics. Okay, Justus Liebig, let me get this rolled up here a little bit more. Justus Liebig says, the finest imagination in the world could not have conceived of a better idea than the philosopher's stone to inspire the minds and faculties of men. Without it, chemistry would not be what it is today. In order to discover that no such thing as a philosopher's stone existed, it was necessary to ransack and analyze every substance known on earth. And in precisely this lay its miraculous influence. Okay, so that's like the alchemist's dream, to turn, coal into a diamond. And in trying to have alchemy occur, they learned a heck of a lot about chemistry. Okay, another guy named Liebig. This one's close. Liebig. Abet Liebig, 1904 to 1963. He says, freedom of the press is guaranteed only to those who own one. Yeah, and it's becoming more and more. The only people that own a big press is the ones that got big money, and they've also got the ability to put something on the internet and then promote it. Because how much a video gets seen is more a question of how many people it gets shown to than how good it is. Don't get me wrong. Having a good video is more likely to be seen. But I know I've posted about 7,000 videos now, okay? And I can tell you, if you post about something to do with sex, that'll probably get a lot of views. If you post about something romantic, that'll get a lot of views. If you post about something ethnic, different ethnic groups get such and such a disease, that'll get a lot of views. But if you post about something that replaces treatment that would otherwise be done with a drug, that will not get so many views. If you say anything that annoys big money, that will not get a lot of views. And then there's a question of, if there's a competition with some other channel, if there's a competition with TikTok for viewing a short, that'll get more views than I could make the best video in the world. I've done so many times on some physiology topic, pathophysiology topic, and it'll get hardly any views, 100 views. Just like William Roberts has the best atherosclerosis from a pathologist point of view lectures on the whole internet, he'll have 19, 20 views. Gregory Sloop, something similar. Okay, it's just how it is. So YouTube is the kingmaker. It ain't the public. I wish it was, because I think the public's wants the truth. But it is what it is. You do the best you can.